this bright, sunny, and cold for Los Angeles morning. Every time I start complaining about the weather, I remember I used to live in Chicago for 12 years, and I get a little bit humble and stop talking. -7 in Chicago, Dave just told me. So it's a real pleasure to be here for our monthly breakfast symposium, and to welcome and introduce Dr. David Baron. Dave is a professor of psychiatry and the vice chair of psychiatry and behavioral sciences, and chief of psychiatry services for Keck School of Medicine. So there's much more to his background, but I'm going to let him say whatever he feels is relevant for today's talk, which is really fascinating, and he's going to lead us on an interesting journey this morning on the topic of the role of media in impacting public mental health literacy, a critical topic for our times. Dave?
Well, thanks, Mark. It is a pleasure to be here, and all of you getting up early. One of the things that I find so fascinating about what we all have an interest in while we're here this morning, this whole idea of integrative health, is what does it really mean? Let's be honest, we have a bit of an identity issue. I remember being, when I trained here, I went to grad school here at USC and did my residency and fellowship and worked here for a while and got recruited back to the NIMH, where I was the deputy director of the NIMH, which was a nice position to be in, had a lot of money, and the government wasn't doing sequestration nonsense back then like it does now. But while I was at the NIMH is when they opened, when Joe Jacobson started the Office of Alternative Medicine. And it was a very big deal, and it was really because of a couple of politicians who had an interest in this. And there was a huge stigma against this. The NIH scientists said, this is nonsense. What do we want these nuts and berry people in the NIH? You know, they should be out doing dances and praying and singing Kumbaya together. This was the mentality. But they needed somebody from mental health. And I said, you know, I think you're wrong. I think there's really something here that we should pay attention to. So I was the mental health NIMH representative to the original Office of Alternative Medicine with Joe Jacobson and John Spencer. Some of you might know those folks. Joe was a very interesting guy. He got the job. He was a pediatrician. He had no interest whatsoever in it. But he was Native American. And at that point, they thought, Native American, he must be into alternative stuff. Literally, this is true. He knew nothing about it. He wasn't all that interested in it. Jacobson was an interesting guy, though. What I was interested in is, I grew up, just by way of background, it is true there is a gene for psychiatry. My dad and grandfather were both psychiatrists. All my uncles were psychologists. My son is going into psychiatry. So I was always interested in what is it that allows us to really understand something. You know, we talk about teaching being, cognitive, psychomotor, affective. When we're talking about literacy, what it is that we really know. Do we really understand something? The impact on the public is incredibly important. Now, I do a lot of international work. I'm particularly interested. One of the hats I wear is I'm the Associate Dean for International Relations here. So we're schlepping around, and I was in Turkey last week, and I just had to bring this over to show they sent it to me. So I'm lecturing in a number of cities in Turkey. So I get into Istanbul. They have a 20 by 30 foot giant billboard. And it was actually this tall, it was one of the ones I gave. And they pulled this picture off the internet. And you can't really read it because it's all in Turkish, but what I would tell you, it says, David A. Baron, USC, and under Turkey. So it says, David A. Baron, Turkey, 20 by 30 feet. I said, that's a hell of a way to ruffle a guy into your station. But I was amazed at how many people came to this talk. Because they know, there's something about depression, I don't know what it is, but mental health literacy is important. We talk a lot about health literacy. You shouldn't smoke, shouldn't be fat, you should get exercise, all things in moderation. Fairly significant literature. Look at Google this morning, there's 136,000 papers, which is actually a fair small number on mental health literacy. I think it's a really important area. But how do we learn about it? Just like we have a bit of identity issue, those of us who are interested in complementary, alternative, integrative medicine, everyone has their own kind of definition of it. But when you're not clear, you open yourself to potential prejudice. People prejudge because they don't understand. I've dealt with this my entire career as a psychiatrist. People don't really understand mental health and mental illness issues. You're depressed? Everybody gets depressed. The weather's things, don't worry about it. You're anxious? No big deal. Because we confuse a mood state. I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling depressed, or I'm feeling anxious with a disease, major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety, panic, PTSD, we go on and on. People don't understand. So public mental health literacy is critical. It's not about the science. The science helps us because it gives it credibility. ADHD, many people thought years ago, I got involved in the 80s in ADHD research as well. ADHD, it's just a way for the pharmaceutical companies to sell a bunch of stimulants. L. Ron Hubbard, actually Ritalin was the first drug he took a shot at. It wasn't Prozac. And we're grooming an entire generation of drug addicts. Here are these Schedule II drugs that have addiction potential. It makes some sense. But God forbid we let the data get involved. The data actually demonstrates that untreated ADHD is significant risk for substance abuse. Treated ADHD actually goes down below normal. That's not to say that drugs are always the answer, but people don't understand. They don't understand exactly what it is that we do all the time, that there's a therapeutic value to it, because we don't necessarily have all the data. Certainly the psychoanalysts suffer from this. Every study they did was an N of 1. You had one patient you saw 5 times a week for 20 years. You're not going to get N's of 100 or 1,000 on those. So I believe the topic we're going to talk about today, and I really want to have this be interactive, is people need to understand. It's not what we teach, whether it's our students or the public. It's what they learn. Too many of us get caught up in what I call the Teflon effect of education. So what's Teflon? Nothing sticks. We throw all kinds of slides and data and graphs, and we stand on pulpits and people go, oh, that's nice. 10 minutes later, they say, I have no fucking idea what this is. But it sounded good. We need to create a Velcro effect. The Velcro effect is when we throw it out, it sticks. Our students, I always ask my students, tell me the things you really remember. What's a lecture that just stuck in your mind? Now, usually it's, diabetes runs in my family, so I was glued to that diabetes lecture. It's one book. I said, beyond that. Well, it was someone who kind of was able to relate to me, showed an interest in it, brought in that affective hook. Because it's not just about the data. To me, slides can enhance the Teflon effect. How many times have we heard, well, we only have 10 more slides. Let's induce a seizure and make sure we get through 167 slides in the next 12 minutes. As opposed to, no, what's important to learn? What were the really important issues? How do we affect how people feel and think about something? How do we affect how people understand something? Literacy. Understanding, a true working knowledge of something. Beyond just being able to quote the facts. To me, it's the facts tied into something where I have a passion for this. We have a passion for what we do, hopefully, if we're lucky. Because to me, I would hate to do something I didn't have a passion for. To me, that would be one of the real ultimate curses in life. To have to do something that you're just mailing it in every day. I don't care whether you're putting a bolt, on a tire in an assembly line in Detroit. Have a passion for it. We need to create passion in our students. When I was at the NIMH, one of the hats that I wore, I did a behavior on the chronology lab, which kind of allowed me to stay in the integral division. But what I really had a passion for was how do we affect how people think and feel and understand about mental illness, because it affects funding. Fortunately, Henry Kissinger's sister had mental illness, and I had the chance to take care of her. So it gave me an input into Dr. Kissinger, who actually really did talk like this all the time. And I had a chance to, I believe, change his view on what mental health was. He was a very brilliant, powerful guy who then could affect public mental health literacy. It's not about the facts. We need to have the facts, so we're not just saying, well, it's my opinion, it's, he said, she said thing. But how do we present those facts in a way that we create that Velcro effect? So it sticks. So it's meaningful. So one of the projects that we had when I was at the NIMH was this depression awareness program. For some of the more gray beards in the crowd or gray haired, you might remember this was back in the 80s, was Bob Hirschfeld, and we had a big chunk of change and said, well, you know what? Depression is a really big problem in the African American community, and they tend to not get treatment for it. So we did a whole program focused on that, and we had some really nice outcomes from that. One of the ones I'm more interested in that we did, some of you might know I've been involved in sports for quite a number of years, and it's been an important part. Why? Because sports is kind of universal. Everyone loves sports. The Olympic Games. People will actually watch table tennis in the Olympic Games. No other time in the world, but to watch it during the Olympics, because there's something special about it. Sports you would never even think of watching. You'll watch when they're the Olympics. And you'll cheer if it's your country or someone you know playing for it. Nowhere else. So I've been very interested in, and I've used that as a vehicle. So we did a program on adolescent suicide awareness with the Italian government. I was contracted for a number of years ago. And I said, they said, well, you want to work with the Minister of Health? I said, no. I'm going to work with the Minister of Education, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Sport. Because that's how we get through. No one gives a damn about the other guy. I want to get to the public. I want the public to understand. Because the public will drive it. If not, it becomes state-of-the-show science. So we did a couple of ads. One of the ads, you might remember, was a number of years ago, we had this anti-drug campaign going on. And I went, how do we get to the public? So because I was the young guy and I had a budget to do these things, so we worked with some of the folks down in the Humphrey building. And we said, well, we're going to spend so people watch TV. We decided the first ad we were going to do was on drug abuse education. And we wanted to target it towards adolescents. By the time they get beyond that, the horse is clearly out of the barn. And I didn't want to lecture them because that's boring. And we didn't want to show a lot of data slides because it reminds me of being in school. But I wanted to change their literacy in a way that was meaningful. Not that they were going to pass a test that they could quote the statistics on, on how much codeine they're going to take if they smoke that's going to give them cancer. So we did a little survey in the DC area, and at that point, the most important topic was getting fried. The lingo changed really. Well, I'm going to get fried this weekend. Fried was the euphemism for getting high, loaded, and drunk. I said, okay, so this is what kids are saying. We went to high schools and asked them, yeah. Now again, I'm dating myself, we're back into the 80s now. Getting fried. I said, okay, so we got a big chunk of change. What do we want to do? So we targeted certain TV shows, certain time slots, and we did a very simple ad. And we said, there's a frying pan. And it says, we had an egg. This is your brain. Crack the egg on. This is your brain on drugs. The egg fried, that was it. End of story. Now, it was interesting because people said, it's too simple. I said, it can't be too simple. If it's wrong, then it's no good. I want it to be simple because I want people to remember it. And everyone, and we got very nice reviews from that kids said, oh yeah, they remember. Now, did it change their behavior? Maybe not. But I think what it did is people started to think that maybe doing drugs, getting fried, had some impact. It was a lasting effect. I only had a chance to do one other commercial when I was with the feds recently as a consultant. And I've been involved with steroid testing for 6 Olympic Games. So I was the lead medical officer for a number of the Olympics for doping control. And there was a big deal from WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency. We had all this issue going on with steroid abuse that was going on. And it wasn't just in athletes. In fact, the highest percentage of people using it were actually adolescent women who were using it for cosmetic purposes. This is the Hillary Swank phenomenon, after the $1 million. It wasn't like when I grew up, Twiggy was, I was the sex symbol, looked like someone just walked out of an eating disorders program. Then it changed to now, it was what was considered sexy for high school girls was to have a little bit of muscle definition, have a little bit of a six-pack going. And what we found with the Athena program, we did some work up in Oregon, was that it wasn't athletes that was the largest growing use of steroid use. Because at that point, it was kind of an IQ test. Only an idiot would pass if you were in organized sports, because you know you were going to get tested. But it was adolescent women who were the largest group taking steroids. And then we found out that that dropped down a little bit, because then it wasn't as, but then we saw a continued rise of high school guys. Not necessarily athletes, even though we focused on that. Again, they didn't want to look like the guy that got kicked in the sand in the old Bill, but they wanted to look like the guy that was kicking the sand. It was the muscle growth. So it was really more for cosmetic reasons, not for performance enhancement. So we did a little survey, and I've done research for quite a number of years with looking at the effects of steroids in sports. So we know some of the side effects are fairly well known. So this is another ad, maybe you've seen, hopefully, but this was the one I was actually the most proud of. Because I don't have a smart enough brain to think of anything complicated, we had to keep it simple. So we had a football, we had a basketball, and a soccer ball. And that was all that was in the frame. And the voiceover says, when you take steroids, interesting things happen to your body. And the word body means all the balls deflated. Now, most adolescent guys are not looking to have deflated balls. And it turned out that we actually were able to look at that with the Atlas study with Lynn Goldberg, and that resonated pretty strong. We were going to do something with acne, but I couldn't figure out a creative way to show like acne on the face, and then, but deflated balls seemed to be a metaphor that, and it went well. So this is why I believe public mental health literacy is not about signing up for a master's class. I did my public health training in Boston, and everyone in Boston, when you're up at Harvard, everyone thinks that they're a hell of a lot smarter than they sometimes really are. But I must say that most of what I learned was not from some of the brilliant professors that I had there, but really from people who were sitting around and had just brilliant ideas. And the idea that I always had is that if we want to change the perception of mental health, it's not about going back and teaching medical students or graduate students or undergrad or getting into high school classes in psychology. It's about how the public views and sees mental health and its treatment. The prejudice is enormous and continues globally. If we look at one of the most effective treatments for severe depression, it's electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. Been around for a very long time. And there are tens of thousands of papers written in the world's literature looking at this. There was one film that was done about 40 years ago with Jack Nicholson that has had more impact than every single one of those papers that was ever written. Those of you who've seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, right? It portrayed Nicholson. It, to this day, has the most dramatic effect on the public's perception of probably the safest. If you look at the data, ECT is actually probably safer than a full course of most of the antidepressants that we have on the market today. And I say this as a trained psychopharmacologist. The media plays an important role. How are psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health professionals portrayed in the media has a lot to do with how we view the specialty and how we view people who have it. Certainly drug and alcohol abuse. They're weak-minded. They choose to, it was a disease of choice. They took a drink, they shot, they did whatever they went. It's not viewed at, Nora Volkow, who's now the head of NIDA, brilliant woman. Her whole career, really, at NIDA has been, Brookhaven scientist, is understanding the biology of it. To me, what's important is not necessarily that, but people understanding that it's not someone of weak moral fiber, but it's a disease. It's a disease that hijacks that reward pathway in the brain. Just like food can, for people with eating disorder, sex, all kinds of activities, when it gets out of control. So how the public understands, it's not about what we say as professionals. It's about what they see. It's about what they read. Dear Abby, who's a very real sweet person here, I ghostwrite for her. So she'll send me the interesting cases, and I've known her for a very long time. She's a real sweetheart. still has a feud going on with her sister. Ever since her mom died, it hasn't been so sweet with her and her sister. But she says, you know, Dave, there's nothing more important than people understanding mental health without using the words. It's about life. It's about balance. So when she gets some interesting ones, I get a chance to write. It makes me feel good because I know one article I write for Dear Abby is probably read by 100 times more people that have written I got about 130 or so papers published. Add them all together, they probably weren't as read as one answer I write to a Dear Abby column. So the media plays an incredibly important role on what we understand, what we think we understand, what we know, and our ideas about it. You know, it always makes me good. You know, they say, well, you know, psychiatric drugs, they're really so dangerous. Now, I believe that drugs should be always used appropriately, just like everything. I said, not dangerous. I said, I can't think of a single psychiatric drug that will have you lose your hair and vomit for a week straight. Would we ever say that chemotherapy shouldn't be used? But it's about balance. It's about understanding. And the media play the most important role. How we're portrayed. I did this blogging thing. I'm not quite into it, but someone asked me to do a blog. So he said, one of the questions I'm going to tell you is, what was the film or TV show that I thought portrayed psychiatry or psychology in the most positive way? So, before we get in, and we're going to do something a little out of the box, we'll say that's only about 9.5 minutes. We'll say that, we've got a little bit of time. But I want to throw it open to this learned group. Of all the TV, media, characters that you've seen, which one do you think had the most impact? Either on you as an individual or just on society. And there have been lots of them out there.
The Simpsons.
The Simpsons. So, what's the context? I'm talking about the portrayal of a psychiatrist or psychologist, the portrayal of a behavioral health person. So I missed the one if they had a psychiatrist on it. I wish I would have seen it.
Was Bob Newhart, was he a...
Yeah, Bob Newhart, right? So he was, he was just kind of warm, fuzzy kind of guy, and a little nebbish-like, but he was a nice guy, and he wanted to help people. So the Bob Newhart show was one that has come up. Anybody else? What are the thoughts? Bill Cosby, I think was an OBGYN, I think, on his show. But he was memorable. Cosby's an interesting guy. He was my cousin's. When he went to Temple, he was my cousin's roomie. I was actually met him at his wedding. Fascinating guy, a real good educator at his heart. But yeah, I think he played OBGYN. How about else?
Sopranos?
What's that?
Sopranos.
Oh, the
Sopranos, yeah. Yep. Anybody else that think that had impact? In treatment?
Frasier.
Frasier?
Yeah.
Frasier? Anybody? Good Will Hunting. Oh, one of my Robin Williams. Fascinating guy. Fascinating guy. Had a chance to take care of him for a while. Panic is all hell. But Jonathan Withers was his role model, who had been on lithium for like 15 years. So what is it about those people? I tell you, my answer to the question was, why really that was, if you remember the old TV show, not the movie, but the TV show NASH. And I had that Sidney. And I said, why was Sidney? Because Sidney was intelligent, he was thoughtful, he cared not only about his patients, but about his colleagues. He wasn't afraid to live in those shades of gray. So I said, Sidney was one that I always liked. But what was it about the characters that we mentioned that affected? What did they have in common? How did they affect the public view of, in this regard, behavioral health professionals, not necessarily the field? Caring and fallible. Great. What else was it about that? What was the message I think that we give in the world when they watch those about? Change can happen. That these are real things.
Humor.
Humor. The important role of humor. There's actually a whole group of psychiatrists that think that's a really therapeutic thing. I happen to agree. Used appropriately, it is therapeutic to laugh.
Yeah.
I think they humanize sort of the process and
That
demystifies the stigma.
it's the humanization.
Yeah.
The human experience is one. Whether we look at psychopathology or just symptomatic, it's about that human experience. We are social animals. And the need to connect with somebody. And how that's so important. Whether we're studying psychoneuroimmunology and effects of anxiety and depression on the immune system, it kind of the one level, down to just that humanism. That we are not just dealing with laboratory animals. We use that to get proof of concept, but then it's all about the translation. What does it mean for humans? It's not just bench to bedside. To me, it's bench to the community. Because bedside means you're already sick. How do we get it out to the community? How do we get people to understand why it's important to deal with anxiety as a mood state, or depression, what it is? What does it mean? Because you don't see it. I remember when I was in medical school, orthopedic professor said, you know what? You ever see these horse collars that people used to wear? They were kind of like made of foam, and they put them on. They said, they're useless. At best, they keep the neck warm, because you can still move your neck, you can still wear it. What nonsense. People are out there selling these things. It wasn't until I got into psychiatry, a little before, I said, you know what? He was dead wrong.
Yes.
Because the most important thing they do is they tell the world you're hurting your neck. Oh, that poor son of a gun must have been let me get the door for him. They tell the world, because you don't show the signs of depression and anxiety. We might be able to face someone who's not really all that. Or someone who's feeling a little anxious. We learn that as children. The face test is really a very interesting test that's been over the years, how we respond to faces, that the effects on oxytocin and our ability to bond as human beings. I remember when I did ADHD research for quite a number of years at the NIH, and we published a paper that was a terrible paper, in the Journal of Medicine. And why did it? Because it was the first demonstration of changes in the brain with a group of 9 boys from the ages of 7 to 12 who had ADHD compared to controllers. It opened up a terrible paper. Wouldn't have even gotten into a residence term these days. But it got people to think about, no, these aren't just lazy people. These aren't just kids who are just irresponsible, who don't care. They just care about something else. But it opened up this idea, and the public said, maybe it isn't just about being a bad kid, or an underachiever, or someone who just, doesn't care, irresponsible, loses their keys. It's about something that's going on in the brain. So I believe we can use science in an appropriate way to affect how we think and feel about mental health and mental illness. And as the public changes, then we get resources. Now, I've spent a significant amount of time over the last couple of decades advocating for more resources to deal with depression, anxiety, PTSD, psychotic disorders. But I get back to the most important thing I believe that we do. The most impactful thing we can do is use the media in an appropriate way. Tell a story. When we think about it, what are some of our fondest memories? Our mothers or father reading us a story. The holidays are upon us. It's telling the stories that are associated with virtually every religious festival. It's the stories that stick with us. Because we have an affective link to those stories. It's not just about the facts. But it's about how we use that part of our brain, the amygdala, the hippocampus, that allows us to get beyond just this prefrontal cortex, which allows us to think. And think with meaning. When we attach meaning to something, then it sticks. Then we have that Velcro effect. So I believe our role as educators, doctors, not just physicians, but doctors, comes from the word docere, right? What does docere mean? Does it mean to diagnose? Does it mean to treat? No, the origin of the term means to teach. And when we teach, we have to make sure it's not just what we teach, but it's what our students, our audience learn. And I believe one of the best ways to have impactful teaching is to tell a good story. And that's what media is about. It's about telling a good story. And we can all think of our favorite movies, and they almost always will tell a good story about something. So I decided, what the hell, I'm back here at USC after spending 6, 7 years at the NIH in Bethesda, and now I went up and I was a chair of the Department of Psychiatry at Temple. We didn't have a very good film school at Temple. Temple's a state school, and we were worried about, I just got a kick yesterday that, you get an email, $10 million someone gives anonymously. to USC for scholarships. I'm thinking, somebody gave $10 million to Temple back then, they would have renamed the entire university. And the president would have had a myocardial infarction because we don't get that kind of money in state school. So I had the opportunity to come back and say, how do I tell better stories? And what better way than to use the finest film school in the world? So what I did is I made a couple movies. So I was able to go out and secure a fairly significant chunk of change. I had no idea how expensive it is to make a decent movie. So we went out and I got a fair amount of money, and we made 2 films over the last summer. It took about 6 months. It also takes a hell of a long time. I did one on the role of ADHD in youth sport. This is a hot topic. That was a little longer. That was about 25 minutes, and it's done well. It's won a couple of film festivals recently. We just finished in August. And I was able to get a little bit more money, and I made a second one that's much shorter on concussion in youth sports. Now, this is a real hot topic. It's not just about the NFL. In fact, we now know it's the younger brain that's the most sensitive. It has significant effects to the development of psychopathology later in life. Articles are coming out daily. I mean, I can't even keep up with them anymore. It's ridiculous. So we made a film. The first one I'm in, so I can't show that one because you see how terrible. I didn't do much. I actually paid the psychiatrist in the film, so it was a shorter part. And literally, I ran out of money for actors because we got the guy from the Fast and the Furious who paid the lead, so I had to end up playing a part. Did okay, but this one I just do a voiceover. It's a lot cheaper. You might recognize the actors and actresses in it. But what I want you to do as we watch this film, it's about 9 minutes. I want you to think about what was the message that I was trying to portray in this film. What were the issues that I was trying to address in regards to what is becoming a very important topic? Sports, youth sports, are important globally. Now you'll notice, you would think I would have done it with football, I did it with soccer. Because it's tough to show a film on American football in Europe with American football, they relate more to soccer. So, your assignment for this 9-minute film is to think, what the hell was Dave trying to do? What was the message was he trying to bring out? And was it effective? Did it have the Teflon or the Velcro effect? Did it tell a little story? Because if you tell a story, you can hang on to it. You throw up a fact, it's a real crapshoot if that means you want to remember 20 minutes from now, let alone. I talked to my students yesterday, I said, I have what I call the barren vegetable soup analogy. We won't go into that, but because I was at the NIH when they actually cracked the human genome, so we literally parties in the hall in Building 10, it was like landing on the moon. And what they said back then, this is like 30-some years ago now, was the greatest impact this is going to have, cracking the human genome. It's not going to be cancer, it's not going to be biology, it's going to be mental health and neuroscience. It turned out to be pretty accurate. So what I want you to see on this, so hopefully you can see it. I've been kind of schmoozing a bit, I hope the sun gets back. Hopefully you can see it. But what was the message? How do you think it might affect public mental health literacy about a very hot and I think very important topic? So before we show the quick film, questions, comments, challenges, because we guys should have plenty of time. And after this, I really want us to get a bit more interactive and have this kind of engage as more active learners than passive learners. Questions? All right, let's hope this thing works.
Yeah.
You can't see a 11-year-old man. What is this? The wages? You're living in the wild, wild west, or what? I got a headache. Okay, then take some aspirin. It's a report card, dude, right? No, don't start lying. You already hesitated. If you're gonna lie, don't hesitate. Lie. Nothing gets by down, detective. Nothing.
Let's just see, wait a minute. We're going to get the sound of the record. sorry we can't,
Can't change it.
people ask me why I don't like to use a lot of slides for precisely this reason. That's what I get, I lose my voice through what I can always rely on. At least I can say something. The bloody slides are down in this room.
While there's a little time, I can tell them that there's a wonderful art exhibit out in the lobby here, and there are 25 artists who created the show Bridge to the Soul. And we are showing films and doing forums here.
Hey, there's work.
For the public. So if you have anything you want to do between now and February,
You can't say hello to your-
art, we're willing to work with you. And we got your art gallery here.
All right, we'll try it one more time. We might have to be very quiet because the sound is, it actually spent me a hell of a lot of money just to do the mix over on this. I didn't realize how expensive the sound was, but it does kind of pull the thing together. So we'll try it one more time, and hopefully you can, there's not much we can do about talking in the room any, so we'll try it one more time, and then we'll see what happens.
This is a terrible design. This should have dark shit.
This is next week's game is the title.
Hey, there's Fort. You can't say hello to your old man? What is this, the Middle Ages? Are we living in the wild, wild west, or what? I got a headache. Okay, then take some aspirin. It's report card day, right? Oh, don't start lying. You already hesitated. If you're gonna lie, don't hesitate. Also, I'm gonna lie. Nothing gets by, Dad Detective. Nothing. Have you seen this? It's horrible. Look at it.
Okay, well, maybe he was just having a rough time last semester.
Well, he was doing great until 2 months ago. Look,
You made a line chart.
A's and B's all the way until here. Now, C's next.
So what happened 2 months ago?
Washington residence, Sean speaking.
Oh, perfect. Sean, listen, I'm calling about Kevin. Has anything happened to him in the last couple of months? Because he's been acting different lately. Moving around, getting these headaches, and really being kind of difficult.
I can't think of anything.
Well, I wouldn't want you to rat on our friend. This is kind of important. Is Kevin taking drugs?
You kidding me? He got mad at me once for taking too many aspirin.
Well, is there anything else you can think of? Anything that might have happened 2 months ago?
I mean, he got Kevin a couple months ago, but he was totally fine.
He got what now? Our boy's becoming a man.
What does that mean?
Well, he got Kevin in soccer practice a couple of months ago. He got his clock cleaned so bad, so shoes. Mom, I asked my dad, why is he shining shoes? And my dad points to his head and says, always take good care of your brain, baby. Oh, there you are.
Okay, listen to these symptoms, okay? Headaches, dizziness, fatigue, irritability, depression, anxiety, loss of concentration, intellectual difficulties, insomnia. I mean, come on, does it sound like anybody?
Do you think our son has post-whatever syndrome or something?
And, have you heard of second impact syndrome? If you get hit again and you haven't healed from the first concussion, that could be it for you. Some kids never walk again.
Oh. So you're saying you want our son to be able to stop playing sports?
No, what I'm telling you is that these things that you're teaching him to jump back in there every time he gets knocked around, it's not tough, honey. It's stupid.
It's not stupid. People who play games like this take hits like this all the time. I'm fine.
What about your
I'm
insomnia?
fine. Hey, sport, how you feeling?
I still got a headache.
How come you didn't tell us you got hit really hard in practice?
How'd you know about that?
Sean told us.
Sean wasn't even at practice today.
You mean you got a concussion today?
No, I got a little dizzy and my eyes kind of felt a little out of whack for a minute, but then it was fine.
Honey, that is a concussion.
But
Your mom's right.
Gotta call the coach. He's gotta let us know every time our kid gets hurt.
he doesn't know.
What?
I didn't want to get taken out because we got a big game coming up this Saturday.
Look, son, I'm really glad you're that dedicated to your team. But when it comes to things like this, your head is much more important. You gotta look past this week's game and see all the games you want to play in for the rest of your life. You need to tell your coach when you get hurt. All right? All right?
Yeah. All right. Okay. Whatever.
Look, we're going to talk about this more tomorrow.
Well, thank you for talking to him. I'm gonna make an appointment with Dr. Carver.
Well, just another day. Just another tough case solved. My dad detective.
This is serious.
Yeah. You know, some of these symptoms don't show up for like 15 years.
That doesn't mean you have an excuse every time you start feeling cranky.
Sorry for yelling.
Sorry.
So this was actually a film that was done for, I've been taking care of athletes with concussion, Olympic boxers, when I first got involved, since, actually I started with high school football back in the early 1970s. I worked for the Philadelphia Eagles for a while, and then from 1984, most of the summer games since then, I was a physician, and unfortunately boxing was one of the sports that I worked with, and I actually resigned. One of the nice things when I was a lead medical officer, you get to pick your sport. I said, I'm not doing boxing anymore. I cannot even support a sport where the goal is to reduce traumatic brain injury. So I stopped doing it in '96. I haven't done it since then. Now I do soccer, which is a lot more fun. Track and field and swimming, my former sport. But this was not just this was really a combination of a number of cases that I've seen over the years and the issues that I see playing out now. So I want to throw it open to you. So we got a little more than 12 minutes. What were some of the themes that you think I was trying to bring up? Was it effective? I got a big ego, doesn't take that easily. Yes, please.
I really impressed by the movie, and as a parent of athletes, high school athletes who've both had concussions, I get it. I get it from the point of view of the athlete that wants to stay on the field, the parent that wants to help them stay on the field, this lack of information that's been shared,
Or disinformation, yeah.
coaches,
It's amazing.
trying to get coaches on board.
Yeah. It's usually
testing.
the dads who want to push, and it's the moms who like want to take care of the little boy, little girls. So that's a consistent theme, not 100%, but a consistent theme.
And
So
it's not all-
that's a very important part.
I don't think it's always just it's just a parent trying to promote themselves. It's hard to see your kid not do what they love to do
Yeah.
more than anything. And so trying to find that balance, it's really
Exactly, and that's why at the end, where, you know, the dad portrayed it, that Stevenson, actually 30 years he's been on the soap, same job for 30 years, doing, I think it's The Young and the Restless or something. I'm not a big sports aficionado of the soaps, but that was it. I wanted to show him the little irritability, so, you know, because he's got the concussion.
Yeah.
It's a shame you couldn't see the thing where he's playing with the trophy and it falls in the head. 13 takes to get that head slapped off. A whole bunch of trophies to get that. So here it is, the thing we spent all the time, you couldn't see the damn thing on the film.
A couple other points I want to make. You made the point about testing. So, I mean, where are we now with that? Testing has to be done before the injury, so we get baseline measurements. And
Biggest grant I have now, that's what we're looking at. So what I took a shot at was the impact test, developed in Pittsburgh. It's the gold standard, everyone uses it. And it's not a bad test, the problem is you can tag it, which is what I put in the film. You know, John Elway has come out, Peyton Manning has come out, a whole bunch of places. Yeah, we give that, you know, it's what I call the most improved bowler phenomenon. You want to win most improved bowler? Bowl lousy the first time, and then, you know, you're likely to do a hell of a lot better.
Yeah.
And every athlete knows this. They know it's a delta effect. So what we're working on now, I've just started actually a company looking at this, is eye signs. One of the things I've noticed in working with this is the eyes. So we working with a neuro-ophthalmologist here, and we have we work with some engineers, because if you've ever, one thing I would say, they'll rub their eyes, and you can almost diagnose initial concussion by their response. Because the eyes talk to the brain to tell you what you see. The brain talks to the eyes. And when you've been hit, there's a slight delay. So you get something called saccades. Instead of a nice smooth motion, you get this little jagged. And we've got that measurement, I have that in 370 football players before the season, and then after they've been hit. What I want to do is work with our friends at CHLA and start testing these kids. You cannot tank it. It's an objective measure. So I put a little plug for mine in there that there are tests out there. There's a number of them. I think they're all flawed to some level. It has to be objective. You've got to get it early on. We've been able to identify that most football players, by the time they get to high school, are already somewhat damaged goods.
But can you, with that test, determine a return to play?
That's what we have a $1.6 million grant in the NFL is to say, can we determine return to play criteria? So that's what we're working on. But thank you. You picked up some of the most of them. How about some other folks? Messages that you heard that either were effective, not so effective, too subtle, too overt? Yes, please.
So my background is project management, change management, and if you guys are aware of the model, you have awareness, you have desire, and so forth. And I think when I start thinking about behavioral health, the awareness part wasn't there. Why do we care? Why is it personal, and how does it relate to me? And people, I think you stick with that. You kept it personal with the storyline, the whole sports, because the part of the American dream is to have your children in sports and get them involved. So I relate to it, wanting to have that someday. And I think your message of it can happen to you, personalizing it, I think that's the strongest point for me.
Great, thank you. Lynn, and then here, you had a comment.
Well, I think that what you did was exactly what you said you wanted to do, bring in the whole community. So you showed the family, you showed the school, you showed the doctor, and you showed raising awareness so that at every level, people could be better stewards of self, others, and their...
Great, thank you. I mean, that actually we did, so he calls the friend, and the friend says, and the kid says, how do you know he wasn't even there? It was another concussion. So again, this is a systems issue as well. Here in the back, sir.
I think this is from a personal experience.
Sure.
In high school, I was playing lacrosse, and I had a head-on collision with someone twice my size. It knocked me out. I didn't do anything about it, and I woke up. Nobody said anything to anybody. There was no coach, nothing. I just went on my activity, and I decided to quit lacrosse. So what I picked up in this film is the boy's hesitancy to say anything.
Yeah.
And I think there should be some kind of way that coaches or people are observed type of contact sport, soccer, lacrosse, football, any type of infraction that does occur should be done with both the people.
Yeah, it's very important. I actually bring sport to collision, contact, and non-contact. And certainly collision sports, well, part of the game is that you're going to have contact. Football, ice hockey, lacrosse. And then sports like basketball, where you might have contact, but it's less common, you still have that. And then non-contact, swimming, and golf, things like that. Although, believe it or not, I had a golfer got hit in the head with the ball. It was sickly, so it can happen to anything. But no, you're right. Part of it is this awareness, it's this public health awareness. And the idea, it's not looking at the TBI literature, like, oh yeah, someone, they're in a car accident or they fall off a ladder. It's a totally different animal. It's the effect of those mild things, and it's not just with athletes. You see soldiers, you see the elderly, we're looking at women who've been the domestic violence issues have been banged around a little bit. So part of it is raising that public awareness that there is a price you pay. And that's why I use my Baron Sunburn analogy, right? Not that the skin is the same as the brain, but people can relate to the fact that, yeah, things can kind of add up and accumulate. Everyone knows that, you don't want to get a whole lot of sunburns. And in fact, if you're light-skinned, maybe you have more precaution. So it's, I don't want to do a lot of lecturing, but I want people to start thinking about it. And this is an important part. So thank you so much.
But not only that, but there should be some supervision. People observing these sports.
Yeah.
And making a report or something.
Yeah, what we're doing is we're actually, we've worked with a group now that all high school coaches now have to go through an awareness training program. We've been able to make some pretty significant strides in getting people to try to increase the awareness. What I want to do is increase public, because that's the public pressure. We need to change the culture of sports that you show you're a gladiator by getting back up when you're woozy, like one of the themes. No, mom says it's stupid, there's a price you're going to pay. I don't mention second impact syndrome, but she says, it's the Ryan Leasat story. Junior high kid plays football, gets hit, comes out, says, I'm okay, coach, goes back in, gets a minor hit in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. That's actually started all the legislation. So thank you so much. Take it back and then we'll work around. Yeah.
Yeah, so one point is just the stigma, obviously, of, having to pull out of the game and sort of be, called a wuss or something, that you're not playing. And that's a trifecta, because you have parents, coaches, and kids all believing that same thing. And so there's no break of that triangle. And really getting the awareness back to the public. And even though you highlight the role of the physician in this particular clip, it's really about the control needs to be back in the kids, the parents, and the coaches to make those decisions.
So good, because you couldn't quite pick it up. But the kid, even when the dad says, yeah, right, whatever, because you're not going to change the kid's attitude. He or she still wants to show how tough they are. That's the culture of sport. That's what we need to change, is the culture. So I'm sorry you couldn't pick that up, but that's why I wanted the kid, the dad's telling him, but that's the beginning. Because until that kid really believes that to be true, he's still not going to tell the coach. Once again, that's the whole title, forget this week, it's all about next week's game. Will you be able to play? Great, thank you, wonderful. Let's just work around.
I think, though, there's also the social view of this. It's not just about getting in the game next week, it's the positive reward of it. And, the father with trophies, and everything, he gets rewarded for actually doing that. And then the social aspect of you work heaven, right? So now suddenly getting hit and getting banged up has this, it turns it from this bad thing into, it's something that's positive, that you got hit and you jump back up and you're back.
Yeah, and that's what we use the trophies. That's the symbolism of his reward. And what happens? It drops, and the trophy breaks. So it's hopefully the metaphor, is.
But even the kids then saying, calling it getting heaven. He's now suddenly identified
That's right.
as.
So we've not turned the trick. I mean, that's right. This is still something that we got a lot of work to do. But it starts with building that foundation of awareness. Exactly. Great. Thank you. Yes, let's just go to.
I was just going to say the patient-physician relationship seemed alive and well in there, and now you see the whole shift between physician and patient, and we're losing a lot of that. That was obviously still there.
Yeah, it's not just about a number or prescribing a med, or it's about getting involved, and it goes back to my background is being trained as an osteopathic physician and the family, and it's about the whole system. Great, thank you. Yeah, John.
In light of what you said about the Velcro effect and also the importance of storyline, was that why embedded in this whole drama you put that little story about the shoe shine, the boxer who was in the shoe shine? What made you, how did that get into the script and why?
Okay, great question. It's actually a true story. When I was 7 years old, my dad and grandfather, both psychiatrists, there was an AMA convention at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami. It was a big fancy hotel back then. And I was like so proud. Here's my dad and my grandfather, and I'm just this little kid. And we're walking down the lobby of the Fontainebleau Hotel. And this guy comes up and gives my grandfather, who's not a big guy, this bear hug. So I'm like really freaked out. I mean, this guy, Grandpa, what's going on here? And he was shining shoes. And my grandfather was actually the ringside doctor at the Dempsey Tunnel fight. So he had been involved. He was an interesting guy. He got involved with sports very early on. So I came by, I guess, somewhat naturally. And the guy walked away. And he looked at me, 7 years old. There are very few things I remember, but that I remember. And he gets, I guess my grandfather, I was a little shaken up. And he looks, and I said, no. He said, not to worry. He always called me Davey. He said, not to worry. He said, that guy's a former heavyweight champ. And I said, literally, as that's, I said, Grandpa, shoes. And he looked at me and said, Davey, always take care of your brain. And that line stuck. And so that's actually a true story. So that's, you always like to put a little bit of yourself into something. And that's one of those things that is probably what got me interested in the field from the time I was age 7 at that point, because it always stuck with me. What did it really mean? How do you take care of your brain? And I got really interested in how the brain works and neuronal mechanisms. And I think that was maybe the seed that got me interested. Like, maybe this is something like this. So that's where that came from.
What's your next commercial?
Maybe so. Maybe so. Yes, please, Mary.
I proposed the last slide for you, which are combining some approaches you used and some that I learned from Martin Kaplan in his work with entertainment and health. I think we need something on the last slide that says, see something, say something, because the teammates have to contribute. Keep calm, don't carry on. That's the Dave Barron piece. And then one of the things that VOC has done with other entertainment groups, specifically TV, is to provide a phone number and a website, and then track who goes to the website.
We actually, the other film we did, which is longer. You're actually, at the end, what we have is they have the producer interviewing me, and it's just a dialogue about ADHD and this and that, and we just talk. And then we have a list of websites to go to and phone numbers to call. We were going to put it into this one, but we ran out of cash, but you're absolutely right. So this is just kind of get the conversation going. And we actually got a little more money. We're actually going to translate this. We got money to translate it into German. We got a lot of interest from the German government, so we might do it in German. Mark, please.
Yeah, Dave, I'd like to broaden it just a bit,
Sure.
if I may, with a comment and a question. One of the things I think, and you even alluded this in terms of the early days of NCAM and that, facing up against conventional medicine and really conventional science, looking for data. And what I hear you stressing, and I'm 100% with you, is the role of narrative in healing, the role of storytelling. So I guess my question is, within the context of the Institute for Integrative Health at USC, is what can we do, or how do you see narrative medicine, what are the various options of where it can be brought in for an evidence base, so we don't get dismissed by conventional, methodologists who say, oh, that's just an anecdote.
Yeah.
Right?
Like I said, psychiatry has been struggling with this since Freud. It's like an N of 1. What does that really mean? It doesn't necessarily fit the classic science model of randomized controlled trials and all the other things. And this is why I think the telling the story, as you say, Mark, is so important. It has to be based on some facts. This was not just, everything in there I could provide many references for. Literature that's been done. But I didn't want to really quote those. So I think you raised what I believe is maybe the single most important challenge of this aspect of what we all have an interest in. And that's, how do we integrate science that exists and get people to take it seriously and understand it? As we saw from this film, no one took head trauma seriously. No big deal. That's why the NFL lost $765 million paying out of this, because they downplayed the role. So I think we have to have a science base. Does it have to be, the classics? Maybe not, but there's got to be something there. And then we have to tell the good story and have people, to me, it's about asking the good questions. Have people consider it. Have it in their mindset. Consider what the role of mindfulness might be in this. Just consider it. Tell a story where it shows why it should be relevant. We're not here to preach. I think when we get too preachy, we lose credibility. When psychiatrists would stand up and say, it works because I say it works. Well, who the hell are you? Right? Or I had 5 patients in my career that really benefited from this. We have to have a base of some science, and then we have to have people consider it. And I believe the way we package it is important. So this is a challenge. If I had the answer, I'm not smart enough to come up with that, but I think it is an important challenge. And if we are to promote this field, we cannot lose sight of that. How do we package and get the message out so we're taken credibly? Just like how do we get people to take head trauma as being a credible thing, and what can we do? It's not about preaching, it's not about us saying it works, but engaging the dialogue, having people start to think. Yes?
Last 2 questions.
I'm sorry?
Last 2 questions.
Oh, last 2 questions, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, I didn't realize that. Yes, these last 2, please.
So it was a great film, but I feel like it's really targeted towards a certain audience. Here's a boy who had 2 parents at home who were paying attention and saw a drop in grades and all this kind of stuff. And I just feel like there's so many more kids where that's just not the case. And to bring in the other side of it, maybe the school or somebody else or the...
There's no question. I mean, it was a boy, in fact, the #1 sport percentage-wise for concussion is women's soccer. The problem is, this was made to do a bit more internationally. And you're right, I mean, it doesn't get into a lot of cultural things. There's a lot of stuff it doesn't do. What I want to do is try to at least kind of start the discussion, start the dialogue, have people start to think about it. But you're right, it's a standard, there's two parents there, the guy was drinking at the beginning because the whole role of alcoholism in regards to concussion and alcohol use. So there's a lot of things that are very subtle, but you're right, it's one particular stereotype, and if people think this is valuable, then maybe we do some other things and look at other paradigms. Women, single family, there's a whole bunch of, he can pick up the phone and call a doctor. A lot of people don't know that, have to go to the emergency room. So there are many issues that it does not attend to. I absolutely acknowledge that. But hopefully, and this was actually made for a fairly specific audience. The ADHD one was made for actually soccer coaches to get them to appreciate. It's a longer film, but we have to get, the longer you do, the more you get into it. It's an absolutely valid criticism. Last question, and then I guess I'm sorry for keeping people a bit over, please.
When you brought up always take care of your brain, it makes me wonder, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Do you ever see us having routine checkups for our brains ever in the future? Anything in those lines? And I know we do assessments in primary care, but they're just what you think as a person, or if you want to share that with anyone, so you don't really get a true assessment. I don't really think it'd be too expensive to have scanners.
Well, I have a machine that we developed with some of my old colleagues back from Harvard. We've got 30,000 people that we've looked at for ADHD and screening because there's some very specific eyesight changes that you can see that we validated that. And over the last couple of years, I've got a few bucks that we're looking at this now in sports. I like to do it with youth sports. Very simple to do. The answer is yes, I think we do need to start looking at it, and we can change that culture. I remember when seatbelts were actually, it was not every car had them. You had to pay a little bit extra. So we changed the culture from seatbelts to not only is it, maybe just a little add-on that it's required. I remember when ice hockey players, they had to be really old. The damn goalies never wore masks. They looked like they had railroad tracks from all the scars on their face because you showed your toughness. Now, you can't even play in the league, without. Gordie Howe was the last player who was allowed to play without a helmet. So you can change the culture. I believe what we need to do is change the culture about how we view the brain. It's not about just getting hit in the head. If you can hear when I'm talking to them over the phone, it's not about getting hit. It's about hitting. And some of the worst hits I've seen for some most significant concussions, they didn't get hit in the head. They got hit in the body, and hit the brain. Like I say, the brain sloshes around. So I think we can change. And what I wanted to do is start people to think about that. The brain, you got 3 trillion neuronal connections, pretty complicated organ. Maybe we better be spending more time. And we are getting closer with imaging techniques. And hopefully, in my time, we'll be able to do a much better job of that. And then assess changes, return to play. There's a whole series of things that we need to get to, but we got to start somewhere. Well, listen, I want to thank everyone for coming. I'm sorry I went a few minutes over.
Just quickly, I want to make the announcement for, hope you have a happy holiday. Our next seminar is Thursday, January 9th in this room. And we'll be talking about the clinic, business models for integrative medicine.
It's going to be a really, I just want to add a couple. It's going to be a really exciting session. We're having the office manager of UCSD's program come up to speak.